equity and diversity and entrepreneurship. So again, my name is Dr. Ansley Booker. I'm the Director for Diversity and Inclusion at Mercer University, and I have the esteemed pleasure of moderating today's panel on equity and entrepreneurship. And so what I'll do this morning is go ahead and get started with introductions of our panel members. So this morning on our panel, we have the pleasure of meeting Ms. Shanita Davis. Ms. Davis is a native of Macon-Bibb County. She is the current founder and CEO of the People's Advocacy Group Incorporated, which is a local nonprofit committed to civic engagement, community accountability, citizens' rights, and restoring cultural identity. Welcome, Ms. Shanita Davis. Panelist number 2 is Mr. Alex Habersham. In 1991, businessman Alex Habersham was a forerunner in Macon media. The Macon-Middle Georgia Black Pages was what he founded that year. Today, it remains a reliable and community economic and informational resource. According to Habersham, the Black Pages was designed to promote Black-owned businesses in a one-stop shop annual listing. Panelist number 3 is Mr. Shane Brewster. He is the owner of Z Beans Coffee Shop. In 2016, Shane went on a trip to Mercer on a mission to Ecuador. What he was able to learn from that trip was he met several farmers, Arturo, and one local farmer was able to create an economically sustaining opportunity for those people to bring to the life of Z Beans Coffees, to use those farmers as a catalyst to help support their families economically. Panelist number 4 is Mrs. Clara Cox. Clara Cox co-leads Georgia Stomp, with a statewide coalition of 21 organizations working to address menstrual equity in Georgia and reduce the barriers caused by period poverty. She states that we have made a lot of progress in the last 3 years, but there's much more to be done. Panelist number 5, Stephanie Howard. Stephanie Howard is the director of the Mercer Innovation Center. Stephanie is in charge of overseeing the growth and development of the Mercer Innovation Center in all of its endeavors. She's taken the vision and mission of the MIC and has continued to make Mercer innovate. Panelist number 6 is Mrs. Tanja Kabir. She is the executive director of the Griffith Family Foundation, where she has orchestrated and designed and implemented a social justice framework for community-centered grant making in Central Georgia. Kabir focuses on developing relationships, resources, and the capacity for grassroots organizations and leaders in Central Georgia to enhance their community impact and drive sustainable change. We also have panelist number 7, Susanna Maddox. Ms. Maddox is the owner, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Macon Magazine, which is a bi-monthly publication in its 35th year that seeks, shares, and celebrates the good life and great stories in Macon and the surrounding region. She grew up in a family of storytellers in Monroe, North Carolina. So when you see her, make sure you ask her about her father's ghost rock and the days she played hooky from school to tell stories alongside her father at local schools. And last but not least, we have the esteemed pleasure of welcoming Dr. Anissa Jones. As one of the nation's acclaimed business consultants and coaches, Dr. Anissa Jones, aka Dr. Nissa, is a nationally recognized chiropractor. He is also a best-selling author and speaker. Dr. Nissa is the founder and clinical director of Total Health Chiropractic and shares her business expertise via her popular YouTube series, The Boss Up Hub, to help #head bosses in charge turn their dreams into dividends. With her credentials and gregarious personality and bedside manner, it is easy to see why she is America's chiropractor. So again, welcome all of you all to our panel this morning. So just so you know, I want to give a little bit of background about the Equity and Entrepreneurship panel and how that got started. When asked to host this panel, I wanted to make sure we talk about equity in terms of entrepreneurship during Macon Startup Week. So I sought to the expertise of these great individuals that you see here on the panel this morning. And also while I was looking at that endeavor, I wanted to start thinking about Monopoly, the board game. And so when I was doing a little bit of research about Monopoly and its capitalistic origin and its original creator, Lizzie Maggie, and how she wanted to make sure people understood economic wealth and also the distribution of wealth in communities and the opportunities that monopolies had over small business, I thought this would be a great platform and forum to have that discussion with a lot of our local experts on what is equity and how do we distribute that and what does it look like in Macon-Bibb County. So again, Equity, by definition here, is the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all individuals, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. So I'm going to start our panel off to be with Ms. Shanita Davis. And Shanita, the first question goes to you, and it states, data shows that diverse and inclusive teams are more innovative, which leads to stronger profitability. However, in 2015, only 1% of the funded startup founders were Black, but they made up 11% of the overall U.S. population. So during your On the Table discussion, you shared some great data about the pay and other socioeconomic disparities here in the nation and in our town. Would you please share that data with us and how it will impact Macon-Bibb County?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Booker, and for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. Many of you may know, and some that are watching for the very first time, Commissioner Virgil Watkins is a part of the Unum Fellowship. And a part of that fellowship has provided us with some specific data for Macon and Bibb County. And this data, because sometimes data is nationwide and we apply it to our local circumstances. And so this data is from 2018, and I'll just share a couple of data points as it relates to the conversation that we're having today. So more than 3/4 of white workers in Macon and Bibb County earn at least $15 an hour compared to half of just the workers of color. The median wage for white workers is about 50% higher than the median wage for workers of color. And again, this data is locally for Macon and Bibb County, not on a national level or a state level. Black workers are 3 times as likely as white workers to be working full time and still economically insecure. And this one at the end here, the last two really stuck home with me, that 2/3 of renter households headed by Black women spend more than 30% of their income on rent. And then the last one is 6 in 10 Black residents. 6 in 10 Black residents live in a high poverty neighborhood, limiting their access to jobs and services. And so when we look at this data as it relates to entrepreneurship and some of the things that we have been discussing, you can see that the inequities, especially across the wages that are earned, the access to jobs, the neighborhoods in which we live in, can affect our ability to be able to even have entrepreneurship, because the majority of your time is spent actually trying to survive, even if you are working full time. So we've heard the term coined a lot of time, the working poor, or even in middle class. So this data and this information that has been shared with us gives us concreteness to some of the things that we've already heard and some of the things that we already know about our community.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I definitely heard that term, the working poor. So that's very important when you think about equity and entrepreneurship, because if you're, living paycheck to paycheck, you might not have the opportunity to start your own business, to move up and make opportunities for yourself and also your family and build those opportunities for generational wealth. So now I want to move the next question. Now we have a data point and share some great stuff here with Shanita. I want to move over to Shane. So Shane, we know that you are the owner of Z Beans Coffee. And so what I want to know here, it says, we know that active engagement of a diverse group of entrepreneurs will lead to economic empowerment of underrepresented people around the world, making the world a better place for everyone. Could you tell us a little bit about the origin of Z Beans Coffee and the impact it has had on those underrepresented entrepreneurs that you have worked with through Merch on a Mission in your study there?
Certainly. Yeah, first and foremost, thank you all for this opportunity and for allowing me to be on this panel. I think it's an essential piece of entrepreneurship, so I'm excited to share a little bit about Z-Beans and how we try to stay diverse. And so Z-Beans was started through an academic-based mission trip to Ecuador during the summer of 2016, and I went with an economics group, and our goal was to see if coffee was a viable alternative to gold mining. And so, fast forward a lot of steps to getting to that point. I just want to, be able to get to now. And so farming in itself is just practicing entrepreneurship, And so what I found, like on that trip to Ecuador, was that the average farmer would be selling his coffee at a price that was extremely close to what it was costing him to, be able to grow the beans. And so one of the ways that, we wanted to start is, there have to be non-negotiables in business, but there also, most importantly, have to be non-negotiables in life. And so when it came to what are we going to pay these farmers, and it's very similar to what the message we just heard. If a farmer is selling his coffee for the exact same price at which it's costing him to grow it, how does he ever advance? Much less, how does he ever put food on the table? How does he scale his farm? How does he practice entrepreneurship and do what we all here expect to be able to do, which is grow? And so, we've set a price floor. We pay, farmers $2 a pound for green coffee beans. And so to put that in perspective, fair trade certified organic coffees. So all the certifications you could possibly have. Last year at time of purchase, we're trading at $1.88, paying into cooperatives. And so when we go down to Ecuador, spend time with the farmers, build relationships with them, we're paying them directly. There is no cooperative. And so that, what the cooperatives bring through helping with logistics and helping through marketing, we do it ourselves. We take on that responsibility. And, furthermore, we're paying the farmers direct, just as we hope to be paid here in the States. And so, that in and of itself allows those farmers to grow in an underrepresented, an often taken advantage of population, throughout the world, those at the bottom of a supply chain. And so, that originally, the original intent of Z-Beans was to import these green coffee beans and to be able to sell them. But when I got them here to the States and realized that everyone else was paying prices less than what I was willing to pay in Ecuador, we had to build a brand. Thus, Z-Beans came to be.
Wonderful. I love that story. I definitely love that story about how you're giving back and you're setting up opportunities. One of the things that I want to use to segue to our next question is you talked about leveraging your skills, helping the farmers there in Ecuador with their marketing. And so I think this next question goes to Alex Habersham. Mr. Habersham, you promote in the Macon Black Pages a variety of diverse and large entrepreneurship, small businesses and large businesses. Tell us a little bit about the Community Foundation of Central Georgia sponsored the Recovery Fund. What impact do you think COVID-19 had on small business and entrepreneurs in Central Georgia? And when you speak to the relief efforts with the Community Foundation and the Black Business Support Fund? I think you're still muted.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Tanja. She played a major role in our being able to secure $100,000 from both the Community Foundation and United Way and the Knight Foundation. And we endeavored to provide some relief to these African-American businesses throughout Central Georgia because of COVID. But what we discovered is that, and we all know that African-American businesses suffer disproportionately as it relates to a handicap in being able to do business equitably. So we were able to award this $100,000, but we also discovered that, there are several other factors. This was kind of like an immediate relief, but the factors that influence the disproportionate position of African-American businesses still exists. But we were able to save some of the businesses with their being able to have rent and things of that nature. But my observation as it relates to that is that it has to continue. There has to be additional effort as it relates to funding and networking and joining partnerships and coming together. I think that's one of the major problems, particularly as it relates to African-American businesses. We have got to build a support system for each other. So the funds made a difference, but it's not going to last unless there's some action that's taken to make sure that it continues and to make sure that we're in a position to address the problems that will still exist as it relates to the lack of equity in the community. So it was very helpful, but what has to happen is that we have to do things, get together, come together, put together programs and activities that's going to help to move forward with it. And that's what we're working on now. And we had a a group of African-American businesses, particularly downtown ones, to come together on the table and have a discussion on some of the initiatives that we can take to make sure that not only downtown businesses, but African-American businesses throughout the community come together and put together some kind of programs and initiative to make sure that we can effectively and measurably address the inequity for business, for African-American businesses in our community.
Amazing. Thank you so very much. So now I want to move over to Claire. So Claire, could you tell us a little bit about, we talked about inequities in businesses with Mr. Habersham. Can you talk a little bit about discrimination policies? And so I want to start with this statement here. It says, one of only 3 states, Georgia has no state law providing comprehensive civil rights protection. How would the comprehensive civil rights legislation have impacted small and large business here in Macon-Bibb?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me on this panel. As I think many people know, we recently passed a comprehensive civil rights protection ordinance here in Macon-Bibb, but regrettably, it was vetoed by our current mayor, and so it is not law in Macon. That ordinance would have prohibited private sector discrimination in housing, employment, public accommodations on the basis of all federally protected classes of race, color, religion, disability, national origin, age, sex, marital status, sexual orientation, and gender identity. As far as new coverage, we weren't breaking any new legal ground there. Anyone can currently file a federal law school suit on any of these categories and find that they have protections. What the CCR in Macon provided was a local mechanism for coverage and recourse for people. Filing a federal lawsuit is expensive and can be a drawn-out multi-year prospect for both the plaintiff and the business who might defend. And when conflicts aren't resolved quickly, people, businesses can be hurt in many ways, including reputational damage that can take years to repair. The process in the ordinance that we had proposed meant that a person who was aggrieved could file a complaint with the county. It was then sent to a local non-binding mediation with a hearing officer determining the outcome of that. And then if wrongdoing was found, a fine for the violation. There was also the option to appeal to the Court of Bibb County, Superior Court of Bibb County, if needs be. And none of that precluded or usurped the ability to file a federal lawsuit. That ordinance would have been a really good thing for Macon businesses, helping us draw a more diverse population, both of employees and of customers. Many groups in the country look at the Municipal Quality Index to see what kind of environment a community is. So they look at anti-discriminatory practices in a city. Macon currently doesn't even report to this index. Zillow reports what protections are in place when people look to relocate. And Macon's rating shows that nothing is in place for anti-discriminatory measures. And as another just really kind of example, but relevant, Atlanta is currently making a robust bid for the World Cup championship. If they're chosen, neighboring cities will benefit from that. Macon won't. FIFA looks at what equity policies are in place, and the fact that our mayor vetoed the CCR will assuredly preclude us from its consideration. Music and film industries also take into the local environment into consideration when choosing venues and locations. So the veto of this ordinance has been a great blow to small and large businesses alike in Macon-Bibb. It would have been something that really helped the development of businesses and moving equity forward in Macon-Bibb County. So I grieve over that.
Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing your hard work with you and your team on that legislation policy. So one thing that I wanted to do to move to our next question, our next speaker, I wanted to look towards Stephanie Howard. So Stephanie Howard runs the Mercer Innovation Center. So Stephanie, we're looking at policy and legislation, but how are we actually preparing our students to become entrepreneurs? So a study by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, GM, sponsored by Babson College and Birch College, found that 27 million working age Americans, nearly 14%, are running or starting new businesses. So how do you prepare Mercer students to become entrepreneurs through the Innovation Center?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that awesome question. First, I would say I'm a big cheerleader. One thing we're working very hard on at the Innovation Center and at Mercer University as a whole is developing a culture of entrepreneurship. What you'll find, especially with young people, when I say young, I mean under the age of 25, is no one is really telling them that entrepreneurship is a real option. And oftentimes, parents will point to a successful entrepreneur, but when that student says, hey, I want to launch my own company and grow and scale it, there's always a pushback. So a lot of what I do first is create a culture of entrepreneurship. And the first thing I do is I always take anyone's idea seriously. Shane was one of our students. He's in an industry that on the surface can be very crowded. He faced a lot of pushback, a lot of negativity, oftentimes because of his age. And so I work really hard to fight against discriminating against young people, especially when they have business ideas. There are 12-year-olds that have, very lucrative ventures, and it took them having a parent or a guardian to really believe in that idea. Next thing we're doing, we have entrepreneurship as a major and a minor. And entrepreneurship is woven into all the disciplines at Mercer University, not just in the School of Business. And so we really are working hard to challenge our students, whether they're a music major or engineer or business major, to think about entrepreneurship, think about solving problems, because entrepreneurs are problem solvers. It's not about the business. Their minds work in a way where they're constantly scanning the environment and looking for solutions. And we really want to cultivate that in our community. Innovation Center is a big sandbox. It is a place where a student who is aspiring to be an entrepreneur or who's already took the baby steps in launching their business can come to have their idea. And we spend a lot of time with programming and making sure they don't skip the business basics. We make sure that they are getting out in the community, speaking to potential customers, and developing a sustainable venture. And it's very important for entrepreneurs to think about sustainability. It has a significant impact on communities with businesses constantly opening and closing. And so we really focus on vetting their idea and making sure that when they launch that venture, that it is sustainable and scalable.
I love that. I love that. Making sure they're sustainable and scalable. So now I wonder if my 12-year-old lemonade and cookie stand would have been a good idea to come over. I'll meet you for lunch one day so we can bring that back up.
The 12-year-old who got to deal with
adult
food. She's selling. Yeah.
Okay, so yes, it will work. I love that. No, I know idea is too small. I just want to go now and I want to transition to Tanja. So Tanja, we talked about sustainability and what does it take, once a student or even a citizen or member of our community wants to go into business, wants to become a first-time entrepreneur, first-generation entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about a little bit about some of the work that you've done with the Griffin Foundation because of that. So as the executive director for the Griffin Family Foundation, your organization has created the Central Georgia Empowerment Fund, a Black Giving Circle to encourage inclusion and philanthropy, as well as the Black Business Support Fund to support Black businesses that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 that Mr. Habersham talked a little bit about. But again, in terms of sustainability, how important is capital and access and resources for entrepreneurs, especially their first generation or first time?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And also thanks for letting me join this team of fantastic people to discuss this. So first off, sometimes when we think about equity, we think about equality. And equality itself is ensuring that everyone gets equal resources. But equity is ensuring that everyone gets what they need. And so when we think about, in particular, entrepreneurship, we know that Black businesses, for example, have additional needs based on a legacy of oppression, as talked about by Shanita and Mr. Habersham. And so one of the things that we know about small Black-owned businesses is that they have a difficult time accessing capital for many different reasons. So minority-owned businesses, they don't have the relationships with lenders, banks, and credit unions as other businesses do. And we saw that when it was time to get the PPP loans approved and distributed. Additionally, these companies are often less likely to have or use payroll and have payroll expenses. I want to say a national statistic was like out of 2.7 million Black-owned businesses, only about 120,000 had employees on payroll. And so another stat was that about 40% of revenues generated by Black-owned businesses are in sectors like leisure, hospitality, transportation, and retail. And we saw during the pandemic that those were some of the hardest hit sectors. And then lastly, like I said, because of that legacy of oppression, that includes neighborhood redlining and, quite frankly, racist bank policies and overall lack of opportunity for people of color. So it's truly important to be able to implement measures that improve capital access. And we can see that in the nonprofit space as well, in order to not only close that entrepreneurship gap, but the overall wealth gap for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in this society. And so those things can include programs, but also policies, like some of the ones that were mentioned here with the CCR, as well as programs that help train people in entrepreneurship, but also provide funding, especially in the category of grants. Most importantly, it's going to be important for institutions like banks to simply change their policies, the ones that keep Black people and minorities out of the wealth and entrepreneurship game. And so some of those policies might be personalized and some of those might be national as well. And until then, it's going to be important for us to create new and better institutions like the East Macon Credit Union, for example, and the CDFI that Newtown Macon is preparing to create as well, just to ensure that we're creating improved opportunities for access. And then in the philanthropy space, ensuring that our institutional policies work better for communities of color.
I love that you brought us some great nuggets, talking about the difference between equity and inequality, and making sure that with equity, everyone gets what they need and the resources that they need. And it takes data like Mr. Habersham and Ms. Davis, Shanita has shared with us earlier to understand that. And what does that look like? So we can use that data to make informed decisions and through our efforts and looking at ways to equity distribute our resources. So I love that. So now this question is for Ms. Susanna Maddox. So Ms. Maddox, a study by McKinsey in 2015 found that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to perform above the mean in their industry, and those in the quartile for race and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to outperform others in their industry. You are the publisher and editor and owner for Macon Magazine and have used the magazine as a catalyst to spotlight and support women in businesses as well as other underrepresented minority populations. So again, what impact does social media / print and digital publications have on entrepreneurship, and what role has Macon Magazine played in removing those barriers to equity?
Thank you, Ansley. Thank you so much for sharing this space and allowing me to be a part of this conversation. Full disclosure, my daughter's 6 children in her learning pod are here in my office today. I have another parent helping with them, but if you hear some children running around, that's what it is. And also we're waiting on the January issue of the magazine to arrive any minute now. So just a little bit going on here, but I really am, I'm mostly doing a lot of listening here and listening to what my peers here are saying, of course, and I think it's fitting because that's what so much of what we do at Macon Magazine. As Ansley mentioned, the magazine, we're celebrating our 35th year publishing here, and I took over the magazine 2 years ago, and there are lots of things thinking about exactly what Tanja just said about equity, ensuring that everyone gets what they need. So sometimes finding the space for what that means when we're talking about magazines. I think that the best way I can answer that, of course, is in the listening, but also in sharing the stories and giving the mic or the platform to people who don't look like, our readership has historically been more affluent. It is shifting and changing, and a major goal of mine when I took over the magazine was to work to show that Macon Magazine to have Macon Magazine share the stories that show all of Macon and do a better job of that. And so we do that in sharing those stories. And I think that amplifying the stories is really important. Like not many people are thinking about local DJs as entrepreneurs, I would say. And so like recent stories are telling people about how those people have shifted, especially now in times of COVID, and that how business, how entrepreneurship is alive and real in DJs in their work. And our leadership issue, 540 Young Leaders, I pulled out an archival. This is our first issue of 540 Young Leaders. But primarily we do it in listening and sharing those stories in the print publication. We also are doing it in the printer is actually here. The delivery is actually here. I'm going to let him in. I'm going to walk away and do this. But we do it also in our programs. So we feature. Hang on just a minute. Hey Ricky, thank you. Come on in. I've unlocked it for you, but come on in. So it's all right. Programs, Women in Business Gatherings. So that is, those are community space where we work to offer co-working and community. And we did that we started that last summer to provide opportunities for people to come together to work in co-working spaces like pop-up co-working. But in that spawned from years of featuring, this is our Women in Business issue this year with Wendy McQueen's art on the cover, but that spawned from years of featuring women in business profiles in the magazine. And so we shifted when the world went virtual of having these co-working days and started doing those virtual. And that has continued to connect people, because sometimes people don't necessarily need resources, but they might just need somebody else who's doing the hustle with them, right? They just need to be able to have somebody else to talk to. Entrepreneurship can be lonely. And that is one of the things we learned. I got to go on a kind of a field trip with Knight Foundation last year, or early in January. This past January feels like years ago, but with Knight Foundation to see their entrepreneurial landscape there. And something that was so clear to us is how entrepreneurship can be very lonely, and that community is vital for entrepreneurs. And so we find that Women in Business is helping do that work and connecting people that might not otherwise connect. As well, doing things like we hosted the Stir Up to Startup. We've done it twice now, but yesterday we hosted that. Hopefully some of y'all were able to come out to that. But a happy hour for entrepreneurs we did through Macon Startup Week, and that was great. But other gatherings that we're doing, kind of boots on the ground things, but primarily it's in the printing the stories and sharing them, like as I said, that speaking to sharing stories of people that to connect with people that, somebody looking at a magazine, they look at a person that doesn't look like them, that hopefully it's sharing a story that they wouldn't otherwise read. And I'll just say personally, I am a connector, as Ansley mentioned, that my background in storytelling is something that has always been in my family and in my bones and in my blood, is listening to the stories and sharing the stories. And I really believe that we've all got a story to tell. We're just looking for somebody to ask us, to tell the story. And so the second part of your question, Ansley, that you said about what role does allyship and advocacy play in local entrepreneurship opportunities, simply it's vital. It's the way that we hear what other people need in this community. And so the best way I can speak to that is to encourage that people listen to one another. And I think first and foremost for me, it starts with realizing that race is in everything that we do in Macon. And until we are honest about that, we can't really ever hear somebody else's story. So I think that again, I get to just be the bearer of this, and I stand on shoulders who created this magazine, but I'm continuously working to do better, to listen to the stories and hopefully share in meaningful ways. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so very much for that, Susanna. And I love that you were being very real and very candid, because, we have to normalize parenting. We also have to normalize, what does a day-to-day look like in an entrepreneur? That means you have to open the door and let the publisher in. So the printer in. So I definitely appreciate that. And I definitely appreciate you sharing the stories with allyship and making sure that we do a lot of that great storytelling to see the diverse people in our community and highlight their stories and their struggles and their triumphs. So great. Thank you so very much for that. So this question is for Anissa as we transition. Susanna talked a little bit about, the women in business, co-working spaces, looking at some of the things that the Knight Foundation was doing for entrepreneurship. And so now I'll start with this particular quote here about things that are happening in outside of our community. And they say, data shows that to combat trends of disproportionate funding and underrepresentation of diverse entrepreneurs, many cities and towns are committed to partnering with social capital networks, providing connections, trainings, and mentorships for entrepreneurs. You own 2 well-established businesses here in Macon. For instance, last year, Newtown Macon sponsored an Entrepreneurs Academy. So as I speak to you and ask you this question, as a female and a Black business owner, what do you think is the impact of race and gender, or even politics, if any, on entrepreneurship in Macon?
All right. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me to be a part of this vital conversation and to share space with this esteemed panel. I'm indeed honored. I'll tell you this, as it relates to disproportionate funding, underrepresentation, as a Black woman, I identify with my group and sector being the most educated. We're the most resilient and strong. However, we're the most neglected, underprotected, and underserved. And so when you start looking at those things and those characteristics, and you think about taking your idea and turning it into a small business, and thinking about all of the things that goes along with that, finding a space if you need one, equipment, inventory, marketing, permitting, insurance, all of that costs money. And without funding, the business can't launch, or you're going to fail. And without cash to smooth over those patches, or if you have an emergency for your company, it's going to be devastating. And as Tanja already stated, this happens disproportionately to Black-owned businesses because of the relationship or lack thereof with banking institutions. It is done systematically by discrimination, and business owners often are expected to know all the intricate details of a loan process, which many of us don't. And that's why I appreciate the Entrepreneur Academy that Newtown does, because it gives you an opportunity to be in a setting with other like-minded individuals and be very transparent and authentic and ask those questions that you might need to be able to ask in a kind of think tank type of environment. And so with that being said, also you have the managing your finances type of piece that goes along with that, because of this systematic oppression that has happened with Black people and people of color. And so if you look at it, our resources are not there because we don't have a system of resources available to or had the opportunity to generate them over a 400-year period of time. Another thing is that a lot of businesses don't have the necessary documentation that's needed. I believe that Stephanie or someone earlier stated that when it was time for PPP People didn't have payroll records. I think it was taught that they didn't have payroll records, and payroll records are important if you are trying to get money from a traditional bank environment. That's maybe the reason why a lot of times we're having the issues. We don't have what we need to leverage everything that we have in order to get our businesses off of the ground. We just don't have the resources around that most other larger or more corporate businesses have to show that, you know, we're going to be sustainable. And from a traditional bank point of view, that's what they're looking at. Or is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to have that time where it's going to be here for a long time? So I just want to throw a few statistics out here so that it can kind of become more real. You know, Black-owned businesses have long faced challenges in getting finances. In 2018, only about 31% of them received all the funding they applied for, compared to 49% of white-owned businesses, 39% of Asian-owned firms, and 35% of Latino-owned businesses. And I got this report from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And in that same time frame, 38% of Black-owned small businesses didn't receive any financing that they applied for, compared to 33% of Latino-owned businesses and 24% of Asian-owned businesses and 20% of white-owned business. So, Ansley, when you're talking about this monopoly game that we are playing, it's truly that, you know, and a lot of times we fail because of a lot of things that we have stacked against us from the get-go. We don't have the resources, and and some of us just don't have the knowledge to know how to play the game. And I applaud Mr. Habersham for his work that he does here in the community to make sure that we have the information, because information is just as valuable as money. So, you know, I can talk about this all day long, but I'm going to, as I say, yield to the time because we got to move on.
I love that, using that Robert's rule of order, excuse me, about yielding our time. So, you know, thank you, Dr. Nissa. You shared some great stats, some more data from the Federal Reserve Bank. And I appreciate you for really highlighting that. I think it's important for us to see numbers and statistics. So this question transitions back to Ms. Shanita Davis. You've already shared the data at the top of the hour, but how can we use data and statistics and analytics to address equity and entrepreneurship? If you can share your thoughts and your opinions for us.
Yes, thank you so much. It has been a great and rich conversation with the things that have been mentioned by all of our panelists so far. And I love what you mentioned as you brought up the Monopoly board. So if you think about it, and the way that Monopoly works, just imagine that someone has already been playing the game for 2 hours. And all of the property, everything has already been purchased. And now you're getting the opportunity to come into the game. You don't have as much money as everybody else because of the things that has happened. You know, all of the good properties are probably already gone, and you're getting to pick up the scraps. So when you think about the things that have happened to Black people and people of color, that's what we're doing. We're attempting to play with the scraps. So the way in which we take this data and this information of things that we know, because a lot of times we have played the game of that's not happening. We have had equality. We've passed the Civil Rights Bill, and we've had all of these things, but we have not gone back to correct the things that has taken place, such as redlining. Macon-Bibb County has been listed as the most redlined community in the nation, like not Georgia, in the nation. And so when you're looking at 6 in 10 Black people living in a high poverty area, and especially how segregated our community is. And so yesterday we had a lot of great sessions. Bethany Rogers did a great job talking about personal finances as it relates to starting your own business and some of the things that you need. And so when you look at that, and I have purchased my home, and I purchased my home in East Macon, I bring this up quite often. I purchased my home in East Macon, and the equity in my home, or the value of my home, continues to deteriorate, where the homes in North Macon continue to acquire or gain equity in their homes. And as we know, a lot of entrepreneurs get a chance and opportunity to probably pull out equity of their home, being able to save the necessary finances to have that 10 or 20 or 15% necessary to apply for some of the loans and different things that was discussed on yesterday or during this startup week. So we can take this data that we know and begin to apply an equity lens to the policies, to the procedures, and to the operations of things that we need access to. We need access to capital. We need to be able to learn those different strategies and information to even put myself in a position to become a homeowner. It's not just to become a homeowner, but to become an entrepreneur. And then if I am able to purchase a home and gather those things that become assets, that I'm not penalized because of where I live, because this community and the way that it was divided and has been divided up had nothing to do with me as a person, but it has everything to do with the governmental decisions that are being made. So we can take this data, in addition to the things that Mr. Habersham are doing, Newtown Macon and others, and hold our elected officials accountable for what they should be doing to help reverse and create new paradigms for people of color and Black people to have access to the things that they need to have opportunities to start businesses and have the sustainability of those businesses. So Tanja mentioned some of those things, like we're starting the East Macon Federal Credit Union and some different financing opportunities that have come with the Black Empowerment Fund. But in addition to those, we need policies and procedures that apply that equity lens based on the data that we actually have.
I love that. I love that, Shanita. I love how you're taking this real-time data and you're taking this real-time statistical analysis to apply it to policies, legislation, and even procedures to get that capital, to get that access. Because again, accessibility is one of the main things that's going to drive equity in entrepreneurship, especially for Black and Indigenous people of color in Macon-Bibb County. Thank you so very much. And so now what I'm going to do is shift it back over to Shane. So Shane, you spoke earlier to how you were being a good steward, being a great ally, being a great advocate, and even a inspiration to the farmers in Ecuador, even outside the United States. So again, with that, some thought leaders have stated that only large companies and organizations have to worry about what we've already mentioned here, which is racial and gender equity, and then the social economic divide. So what are your thoughts as it relates to what you've already heard throughout from our panelists and demographics and the data that they've shared so far?
Yeah, so I couldn't possibly disagree more with the concept that only large companies should, focus on, racial, gender, perhaps age, just diversity in general. And I say that because this is something that, Ms. Howard and I have spoke with all the time. The one benefit of small business and compared to a large business is your ability to adapt and change so much quicker than a big business can. So if you can start diverse, and diversity with age, all of the different factors that make us, as human beings unique, as well as, for Z-Beans' sake, allowing our partners in Ecuador to be truly partners and not, merely a means to an end and just buy their product and kind of shut them off, but actually take into consideration what they're saying. But by being diverse as a small business, it allows you to stay ahead of the curve, and it allows you to, develop unique selling points that allow people to not solely buy your product based on charity, but buy your product because it's better. You're innovating, you're able to grow. And so, and my last point, as I was thinking about this question before this panel, was one of the things that I was always told, reading books about leadership and also just speaking to other great leaders, is that great leaders are malleable. Your ability as a great leader can lead anyone. Sure, I may be a white male that didn't have to worry about much growing up. I always had food on the table, but when I first met, Milton Ribadeneda or Jose Capa, Diego Haya in Ecuador, put a lot of things in perspective when I found out that Carlos Ochoa's son dropped out of, was going to have to drop out in the 4th grade just to help his father on the farm. You start realizing when you, as Susanna said, and I loved it, just listening and just observing, it allows you to grow as a person. So I think diversity within businesses and specifically small businesses, it's essential, and you should definitely
thank you so very much, Shane. I do appreciate that. I do want to make time for this comment. So Sharice Stevens states, this is a great panel. Times are changing in Macon, and your voices will be the catalyst for change. My favorite word, catalyst. Thank you again. So what I want to do now is I want to move it on to Mr. Habersham as we get ready to close out a little bit here. Mr. Habersham, everyone has applauded your work with Macon Black Pages. We've seen some great talking points today about different facets of diversity, including age, race, sexual orientation, veteran status. So what do you think can be some additional facilitators to entrepreneurship, and how can we use things such as the Chamber of Commerce, UGA Small Business, the Urban Leadership Academy, the Macon Black Pages as resources to help Black and Indigenous people of color and all individuals in Macon to overcome these barriers?
I want to interject something real quick, because oftentimes it's overlooked. But we've got a tool. We've got a tool in the African American community. That tool in Central Georgia is $3.5 billion a year that African American consumers spend. So one thing that we could do as a community is that we can be conscious of that resource and of that tool and try to parlay that into self-help. Booker T. Washington said, lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. We spend $3.5 billion a year, and then the dollar stays in an African-American community maybe one day, where in other community it stays 17 days. It circulates in that community. Then I think that that's something that we as leaders and as business owners and as community individuals just need to be aware of that, because that's a way that we can utilize some self-help. Having said that, I know that it's important to network and it's important to become members, and we need to understand that there are resources available. I have to go back to the Downtown Initiative because we've got Miss Stephanie here. But I pulled those resources from SBDC, the Chamber, and Dr. Stephanie and others, to kind of assist with that. And I think oftentimes, many of us in business overlook the fact that there are free resources available that will assist us in trying to accomplish what we want to accomplish, those things that you mentioned, and also the Chamber. I have noticed that there are several major organizations and several entities and institutions that really do, as Suzanne said, they really do want to address the problem as it relates to diversity and equity. But as business owners, then we have to affiliate with those organizations and institutions and understand that we can be successful if we show the initiative, latch on to those organizations, realize the kind of resources that we have already in our community, and be committed, to doing whatever it takes. There are opportunities. Sometimes you have to, incidentally, it's going to get worse before it gets better, unless we make some kind of adjustment, which we can do. So yeah, we should affiliate with, and we need to market. I publish the Black Pages, and I do marketing. And a lot of people think that you don't have to diversify your marketing, but you do. You have to use more than social media. Social media is good. I'm on it, but you have to find other ways like Macon Magazine and the Macon Black Pages to get your message out too. So those entities are important. We need to be a part of it. But by the same token, we need to look inwardly and do all we can do to take advantage of African American consumerism in Central Georgia. $3.5 billion.
I love that you really put in, because then at $3.5 billion, it really just puts a lot of things into perspective for me. And I love that you talk about the historical context of that with Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street, and the circulation of the Black dollar and the buying power that we have as citizens here in Macon-Bibb. And so what I want to do now is I want to go over to this. I'm going to try to get in two more questions before we run out of time here. But this question is for Claire Cox. So as a co-lead of Georgia Stomp, a statewide coalition of 21 organizations working to address menstrual equity in Georgia and reduce the barriers caused by period poverty, you have made a lot of great progress in the last 3 years. As we look beyond the pandemic and as a community emerging from it, what barriers are still in place? We heard a lot of great things about facilitators, but what barriers are still in place and have been revealed by the pandemic for even women in the workplace? So I want to address that.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I don't think it's any news that women have been hardest hit by the pandemic. And of course, women of color, the hardest hit. It's been a dual attack. Women have had to leave the workforce in the greatest numbers to care for children, and in many cases to educate them. And in other situations, women are on the front lines of necessary workers in the service industry and the medical profession, putting them at greatest risk. The hardships faced by women during this time have been exacerbated by existing conditions that we already knew were in place. The wage gap, many of the things y'all talked about today here, lack of childcare, the acknowledgement or lack of acknowledgement of our basic needs. And so in the statewide coalition that you mentioned that I work with, we have worked to address menstrual equity in Georgia and eliminate the effects of period poverty. And the fact that women's needs are not taken into account in the workplace right now, along with men's, is something we work to educate the public and our legislators about. That includes having to pay taxes on something that's a medical necessity and that's required for the health of every woman and for which there is no male equivalent. The sales tax on menstrual products is just profoundly unjust and it should be eliminated. Every dollar paid in taxes is less money in the pocket of a woman to invest in the local economy and move her towards that increased margin that she needed documented for investing in our community. Along with that, having products in schools, government buildings, prisons, jails, those are all a part of what we're working on and have made some progress in. But from a business perspective, the fact that women's needs aren't accounted for is very easily addressed. Something as simple as placing a box of tampons in a restroom at your business means that you are welcoming women and others who menstruate into your business. And having menstrual products as a regular part of your business supply list doesn't cost much to a business owner, but it means you respect your employee and your employee doesn't have to run down the street and purchase something elsewhere, missing time in the office if an unexpected occasion arises. You know, when men go into a restroom, there's no questioning that everything they need will be there. Toilet paper, soap, water, paper towels. So for a business to welcome everyone is simply a matter of adding a $10 box of tampons or pads to that supply list. And I think that's an important aspect to begin to focus and accept as a community to make businesses more welcoming for women. There's some simple things we can do.
Thank you so much, Claire. I love that you spoke to how we can be even more inclusive in the businesses that we already have established. Now, this next question, before I move into some final thoughts from our panelists, is going to go to Stephanie Howard. So, Stephanie, this question is a conjunction between my question and a question from the audience, okay? So in the local community, citizens have access to UGA Small Business Office, and students can even take courses on entrepreneurship and business at even Hutchins Career Academy as early as the 9th through 12th grade. However, what other services or suggestions do you have to improve equity and resources across all demographics? And how can we, on a personal level, for new coming entrepreneurs that are entering the market, make sure we level the playing field for them?
Sure. Mr. Habersham mentioned it earlier, is talking about the resources that already exist. We talk internally about our entrepreneurship ecosystem. We have the Innovation Center, SCORE, SBDC, the Chamber. There are all these organizations that work very hard every day to try to service entrepreneurs, but we can't always get out to them. And so helping us spread the word on these resources that exist, and most of them are free. on the reverse side, internally, myself in this ecosystem, we're constantly thinking about access. You hear the word access constantly in this conversation. How are we thinking about Macon-Bibb County in its entirety, certain sides of town, certain demographics? Are we thinking about how we can extend our resources community-wide? All of us are taking a piece of this community, which I think is a good thing. So we're trying to make sure that no one is missed, but we need help spreading the word. We need to encourage entrepreneurs that may be afraid or intimidated of walking into these offices to know that they are welcomed and these resources are here to help and support them. Just to kind of put their anxieties to the side and just come in and have a conversation and see how the community can help them.
Wonderful, wonderful. So now we're going to move on to our next session, and I want to start with closing remarks. So I think, Tanja, we'll start with you, okay? You got any last thoughts or advice for young entrepreneurs or those that are getting to the entrepreneurial space?
Well, I really just wanted to go back to that discussion of diversity, and I love it. It's, for me, kind of a bare minimum thing. What I love about diversity is that it does ensure that everyone has an opportunity to be successful. But we have to also kind of take it a step further, because diversity is not justice. And so when we think about what success actually looks like, we have to have difficult discussions and have difficult decisions that ensure there's justice, because having an opportunity for success does not mean that there will be that achievement to success for entrepreneurs. So as people who are stakeholders in this industry, it is important that we do create those policies and programs and initiatives that go further, so that we can have this power sharing ability, or even power building ability, so that there will be equity and justice in this playing field for those who need it the most.
Thank you so much. And I want to add on to that, even liberation. So, like Mr. Habersham said, it might get worse before it gets better, but I think if we combine all of our resources and really try to help everyone pull themselves up by their bootstraps, maybe even providing them with bootstraps if they don't have them, we can get to a point of justice and even liberation for our community. And we said already that diversity, innovation, and inclusion helps to move our market forward. So I love this conversation. So I want to move on to Susanna. Any last thoughts, comments, or words of advice that you would like to share?
Sure. I think that mostly to something I keep coming back to myself, and what I hear that other people might speak to other people, is intentionality. It's in the listening and then being intentional about all of this. Like I'm sitting here thinking about like all the people that don't consider themselves entrepreneurs, or maybe not planning to be an entrepreneur, but the people that when they realize how much entrepreneurship is here in Macon, and how
I think my pod, can you hear me okay?
Yes, keep going. Pick up from the last thing.
The value of all of these entrepreneurs is just as valuable, if not more valuable than some of these larger industries, right? We have such entrepreneurship happening here that people need to turn their head more and listen. And so I guess what I'm saying is that, just in this example of Macon Startup Week, I wish there were more people hearing this, that we could get this out even more. But I think it's that, and like having more people listening to this, and also the intentionality of like going to things that are different, that you aren't, that events and gatherings, and showing up for virtual things that that give you an ear towards more of these things that are happening, and again, that hearing people's stories and where they're coming from and what they're going after is where it begins, so that we can know how we can best help each other. I think that not growing up in Macon and moving here 11 years ago, I learned that this is a community of people that are helpers and doers, and people that want to help. That theory, I so much believe in, that look for the helpers. Well, there are helpers in Macon, and people that want to help each other. And I think that, again, that it just takes an intentionality, and that some of it is going to be through, of course, through legislation. And I think that it's also, realizing like what is right here in front of us and how we can show up. Go to, I'm just going to say it, like go to Ambitious Graphics, a business that you might not go to, that you didn't even know was there, but like go see what they're doing, show up. And as we all know, like when you're not sure how to help somebody, the first thing you do is be present. You show up. And so I think that everybody knows the ways that they can, that they can do something a little bit different. That whole idea about, if it ain't working, do something different, try something different. Sometimes that means stepping out of what is your comfort zone to show up and hear somebody else. And I think that we are ripe for that. I'm so thankful for these conversations that really do move to action. So
thank you so much, Susanna. I definitely agree. That if we're going to solve a problem, we have to solve the problem as close to the issues as we can. And, that takes listening, that takes courageous conversations, that takes hard conversations where people may feel uncomfortable, but make sure that we lean into that comfortability so that we can actually make sustainable change and be intentional about our efforts. And I love that, because allyship begins with listening. I love that. So I want to move on to Dr. Anissa. So Dr. Anissa, any last thoughts? But I also want you to speak a little bit towards mentorship and how important that is to entrepreneurship, because we have got some great information in the chat, but people are loving our conversation. They're allowing us to lean more into their time and their busy day. And so I want to keep the conversation going for just a few more moments.
Very good. I kept getting this same question over and over again. They were like, what can I do to get my business started? And it was one of the catalysts for me to become a business consultant and coach, because I want to help 1 million people have their own business and it be successful. And so one of the major keys to it is mentorship. Mentorship is the missing link to small business growth and survival. Without it, you're not going to make it. I was doing a little research, and I'm really big on numbers, so I like throwing numbers out there because it kind of makes it more real. The UPS store, and I'm quite sure we all are familiar with that, found that 70% of small businesses that received mentorship survived more than 5 years. And the first 5 years of business is the ones that you're going to make it or break it. If you can get over that 5-year hump, you've really got some good systems and procedures in place. But, the more data we're starting to get, if you can get to that 10 to 12 to 15-year-old, you are sustainable. So you want to make sure that you're able to double that survival rate of that non-mentored business by having mentorship. And also that same study saw that 88% of business owners with a mentor said that having one was invaluable. How do you get the information? And that was one of the questions I had when I first started my business. Was everybody kept saying, hey, do your homework. That was the big buzz thing. Do your homework. Make sure you know what you're getting into and da-da-da-da-da. Well, who's going to help me create this homework? When you're in school, you have a teacher that's there to help facilitate. They give you the homework, you get it done, you learn your concept. And so you have to have a mentor, a coach, or a consultant that's going to be there to kind of hold your hand throughout this entire process, because starting a business can be quite overwhelming. And a mentor can help you navigate all those complex challenges that often come with being a business owner, because there are so many factors that are involved with business startup. Some of the things I mentioned before, getting licensed, securing finances. These are those factors that can impact on turning that dream into a profitable business. So getting guidance from someone who has been there, who has done that, as they said, been there, done that, is always going to be an asset. And the resources available from that person can provide a new business owner, or even one that's been in business for a long time, the knowledge and guidance that is going to be key to what? Business growth, development, and survival.
Excellent. And I totally agree with you. Mentorship is key and necessary in all facets of life, especially entrepreneurship. Thank you again for those great statistics. I love the fact that you're sharing that. I love numbers and data-driven conversations. So I'm going to move to any last words from Ms. Shanita Davis.
Hi again. I just echo the same sentiments of the things that have been said, but one of the things that I wanted to mention earlier is that, and I think we may have heard the statistic a couple of years ago, and I know Dr. Ennis and I are part of a think tank that we've discussed it a couple of times, that the median wealth for Black families is anticipated to be 0 by the year 2053, and that in 2044 the minority is to become the majority. And with those two statistical data points there, just knowing that information, Susanna brought up the word that I love to apply to these types of conversation is the intentionality. We need more intentionality, and I'll add this second word is proximity. Because if you have not had the opportunity to experience what is happening within Black communities, whether you're a Black entrepreneur, a Black woman, a Black man, a Black person that is living in low income housing, whatever the situation is, there are certain barriers along with mindsets and survival modes that go along. So I love what Dr. Anissa said. Somebody has to prepare me to help me get the homework done. So as all of the stakeholders that may be listening to this, that are a part of helping to develop future entrepreneurs, I just ask that you think about the intentionality and the proximity of actual human being. These data points that we have talked about is attached to an actual human person. It is a person that their lives are affected by the way in which we create opportunity, the way in which we share this information, and the way in which we should not people shame because decisions and choices are not always the best, because you don't know the circumstances that led up until that person being in the predicament or the situation that they may be in. What is seen as irresponsible behavior and irresponsible management of money is also seen as self-care. Some stresses and some things, it's all those different lenses and factors that we need to take into account as we work together to create a more equitable community for everyone in Macon and Bibb County, regardless of race, gender, all of the other factors that play into that, regardless that when equity is the lens in which we are applying it, that race and those other things no longer become an indicator of whether I become a successful entrepreneur, whether I'm able to get the same, when those things no longer become an indicator to the success of our community.
I could not have said it better myself. Thank you so very much, Ms. Davis. I love that intentionality and proximity. Like you said, this is someone's real life and day-to-day life. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for bringing that home and bringing that to our forethought in our consciousness when we're making the decisions. We're making decisions about people's everyday lives. I appreciate that so very much. Shane, any last thoughts, any last words?
Yeah, I'll answer that final question that we have about a word of advice to entrepreneurs. Very short and sweet. The greatest words of advice that I think I've gotten in regards to building a team. This is from actually President Underwood at Mercer. He told me you can only expect of others what you expect of yourself. And I think it's very applicable to this situation. As you start building a team and start trying to add layers to that team, you need to expect a lot out of everyone, but most importantly, you have to expect a lot out of yourself.
I love that. I love that. Great quote, great words of advice. So, Mr. Habersham, and as people have said in the chat box, Citizen of the Year. Any last thoughts? Any last words? Give a round of applause for our Citizen of the Year, Mr. Alex Habersham.
No, I think the other panelists have done a phenomenal job, and appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts. But the key words are networking, resources. If we could just realize the resources that we have, and like Anissa said, and then you got to ask. You got to ask somebody. If you don't know, you better ask somebody. There's a good expression, and oftentimes there are literally hundreds of people who are willing to help. So you can't be all arrogant and think you about that when you're trying to be a successful business person or any kind of person. So you got to ask for help because the resources are there and the willingness to help is there. And don't forget, we've got the $3.5 billion. We could circulate more of that money in our community. It would address a lot of problems that we have. And there's nothing wrong with, lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps. Thank you so much to all of the panelists. You all were outstanding. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so very much. All right, we got two more people with last thoughts. Okay, Claire, did you have any last thoughts or comments?
I will be brief. But in better times, my husband's and my favorite thing is to go up to DC and visit our daughter and son-in-law up there. I think of my favorite brew pub in DC. 2 bathrooms, not marked by gender, period products in both bathrooms, not question. Why in Macon, Georgia, are we still debating bathrooms and thinking it's a novel thing to provide period products for workers and customers? Thanks for having me. Man, have I learned a lot. I love this team that you put together.
Thank you so very much. I love that too. All right. Stephanie, Ms. Howard, any last thoughts, comments?
Just to keep the conversations going. And I encourage everyone to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You got to burst your own bubble, do different things. Everyone on this panel is willing to help any entrepreneur that needs some assistance, some advice. So please reach out and take advantage of all of these people and make a startup week.
Amazing. Thank you so very much. And so what I'm going to do, we went a little bit over time, but I want to remind everyone to, again, shop small businesses, these local entrepreneurs that we have here in Macon. This is a great time to spread some of the love, spread some of the wealth. This holiday season, we can circulate that $3.5 billion this holiday season. And just as a final reminder, tonight, that is today, later on this afternoon at 6 p.m., we will actually have the 5th annual Women's Entrepreneur Conference hosted by SCORE. So again, you logged on at 10 a.m. I want you to log back on at 6 p.m. for our Women's Entrepreneur Conference hosted by SCORE. And that is their 5th annual conference. Again, I thank you all to all my panelists. Thank you again for listening to me as your moderator. And as it has already stated this afternoon, please continue to lead into these courageous conversations and making sure that we're providing inclusive and equitable, and then also looking for ways to liberate others by being intentional and listening carefully. So again, thank you so very much. It was our pleasure to share with you some of the information that we have and resources that we would love for our community to invest in. So again, this is a great opportunity with Macon Startup Week. Continue to look out for some of the great things that we have for the rest of the week and enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.